Years 14 through 18 were more years of self-destructive behavior, more self-sabotage, the introduction of drugs, sabotaging relationships, pushing people away, getting arrested again, years of more feeling alone and isolated, the years of more low self-worth, of depression, and numbing it all. Let me say this for anyone who's not necessarily going through these kinds of things, but may know someone who is. I'm sure that if you asked anybody that was around me at that time, they never would have guessed that all this was going on. Probably because I was quote unquote popular in school, like whatever that means. I graduated with 80 something people, so that really means nothing. But I'm sure that everybody just thought that everything was great in my life. And maybe externally, maybe it was, but internally, it was far from it. And so by 19, I found something else. Something that it felt good in the beginning. It clouded my mind and it was something that made everything, kind of go quiet. Pain pills. At first, it felt like freedom. It felt like relief. It was enjoyable. It was like finally finding that thing that could just silence the noise. And I guess that's one way to put it. But again, this is all this stuff I only found out in hindsight after researching, everything about my life. At that time, to me, I was just taking drugs, right? But there's always an underlying reason that people do that. And you see, and that's exactly how addiction starts. It doesn't start as a choice. It actually starts as a solution. The solution that we don't understand at the time is that we're trying to mask these emotions and these feelings that we don't want to feel. Again, at that time, this wasn't a conscious thing. It was all a subconscious thing, but that's ultimately why people take drugs. But addiction is not about the drug. The addiction is about what are you running from? Because everyone that becomes addicted to drugs is running from something. And me, I was just running from a lifetime of unresolved pain that I had gone through or that I was experiencing. At first, it was just a way to take the edge off, to make life feel a little less dull, a little less heavy. But before long, before you realize it, that drug, it becomes much more than just something that you use. It becomes something that you need just to function. Because it's no longer about getting high, it's about feeling different. Or maybe feeling nothing at all. It's about numbing the parts of you that never really seem to settle. And it's about replacing something that's missing with something that for a moment makes it feel like it doesn't even matter. And that's the trap. You think you're in control. You tell yourself that you can stop anytime, which I did. I just convinced myself, but I don't want to because I enjoy it. But you see, addiction doesn't take over all at once. It sneaks up on you. It weaves itself into your daily life that by the time you even notice it, it's too late. It's already got you. There's this misconception in people that have never experienced it. They assume that addiction is about just wanting to get high. And that's a misconception because sure, maybe it starts off as, just wanting to get high, but really it's about not wanting to feel low, to sound poetic. But it's less about loving the substance, but it's more about like really loving the numbness that you can get from it. And certainly that's a very selfish way and a very weak-minded way to look at life. But when you're so hurt and you have no outlet and you don't know how to deal with what you're going through, and that's why literally anyone can fall into addiction. And it's not even about drugs. We can expand that to addiction, anything. People are addicted to their phones. People are addicted to Netflix. People are addicted to their anger every morning at 8 o'clock when they're driving to work. Like there's a myriad of addictions that people don't want to talk about because it's not as self-destructive, quote unquote, as drugs. But the thing about it is when your brain finds something that helps it ease the pain, it keeps on reaching for it. And that's how it happened for me. I never sat down and decided like, hey, I'm going to be a drug addict. I never consciously thought I need this to survive. Like that was never a thought process. It was just something that happened over time. Looking back in hindsight, I just knew that when I took something, I didn't have to deal with myself anymore. I could just numb out, much Like the same way that people numb out whenever they go home from a hard day's work. They go home and have a glass of wine or whatever the case may be, sit down and veg out in front of the TV. It's kind of the same thing, except one's a lot more destructive than the other. But it's kind of the same process, just wanting to numb out and not feel anything for a while. And looking back, I see it clearly now. I wasn't just numbing myself, I was numbing all of the emotions that I never processed. I was numbing the abandonment wounds from my mother and my brother leaving when I was 6. I was numbing the emotional neglect that I felt. I was numbing from the self-sabotage and low self-worth that I felt, convincing myself that I never really deserved happiness, so I never pursued it, so to speak. And that's what sucks, because looking back, I hurt so many people during that time. I was just selfishly doing whatever I wanted to do when I wanted to do it, with no regard for how it made anybody else feel. I was the epitome of selfishness at that time. And in that whole process, I was just eroding my own integrity, which then only reinforces a low self-worth, which perpetuates the entire cycle. Now, at the time, I didn't analyze any of this. I wasn't thinking about childhood wounds or emotional neglect. I just didn't have much empathy for anything outside of what I wanted and what was going to make me feel good at that time. And I had to process that years later when I came to learn all this stuff and really forgive myself for the piece of shit that I was at that time. But when I think back, because we're spiritual beings, living that way wasn't just reckless, it was destructive. Every selfish action, every shortcut, every high, it pulled me further away from who I was meant to be. And the more it pulled me away, the more I lost myself. The more I lost myself, the lower my self-worth became. And that's what's funny. So it doesn't matter anything about popularity or about people liking you. It's about you liking yourself. And if you don't like yourself, then that's going to cause a lot of issues. And that's the thing about it, because every bad decision that I made at that time had one thing in common. And that was I was just running from myself. And drugs just became the fastest way to do that. This is how addiction traps you. So at first, it works, right? At first, the drugs work. They take your mind off of things, they numb you out, they make you feel good. That doesn't last long. You take something and then for a few hours, you just don't care. Your past doesn't matter, your pain doesn't exist. You finally feel free. But then the high wears off and that pain comes rushing back. The silence returns and that escape stops working unless you take more and more. And now you're in a full-blown addiction. It's not because people love the drug so much. It's because they just can't stand reality without it. After a while, it's no longer about willpower. It's about dependency. After you're addicted, it's about just trying to function. Because by the time you're addicted, you've gone too far and it is too late to turn back now. And it is tough. Once physical or mental dependency kicks in, now you're just trying to live and function on a day-to-day basis. So at 21, I moved from Mississippi to Texas. I thought it was going to be a fresh start, but really I was just taking my unresolved self to a new situation. So by the time that I moved to Texas, I'd beaten the pain pill addiction, but then I got introduced to Adderall. And for somebody that's already wired to escape, Adderall was just another way to check out. It didn't make me sharp or focused. It just got me high. It was just another way to numb out, another way to be disconnected and to keep avoiding reality. Different drugs, same cycle. And just like before, I didn't realize how deep I was in it until it was too late to get out. And that's where I was, still running, still numbing, still convincing myself I was fine, but I wasn't. My addiction to Adderall made me drop weight drastically. I went to like 128 pounds. Now I'm a short dude. I'm only 5'7", but 128 pounds for any adult is pretty alarming. And I looked terrible, unbeknownst to me, because I looked at myself every day. I couldn't tell that I was getting skinny and gaunt and just looking like I was addicted to drugs. I didn't notice myself withering away. And luckily, I don't have a lot of pictures from that time. And there are none on social media anywhere from that time period. And then, not to mention the withdrawal from Adderall. It was terrible for me. It just made me massively depressed. So by this point, I was deep in it. I was depressed, addicted, and completely disconnected from myself. And one night it came to a head where I wrapped a sheet around my neck and I tied it to a bar in the closet. Not because I necessarily wanted to die, I just wanted to see what it felt like. That's where my mind was. I wasn't afraid of the thought. I wasn't desperate for a way out. I was just numb. I was just disconnected from whether I even cared. But I didn't go through with it. I mean, not because I had some moment of clarity or hope, but really because in that moment I didn't know if I cared enough to make a decision at all. Fast forward 2 years later, I'm in another chaotic relationship, and that's when it happened. I stopped on an overpass one night, fully convinced this was it. At the time, I really had no reason to stay. I had no attachment. I had no belief that things would get better. I was brokenhearted. My self-esteem was in the trash. My self-worth was in the trash. I mean, I had no confidence. And I really didn't have any friends around. It was just a place to be at that time. So I pull my car over, tears running down my face. I'm super upset. And I get out and I go stand on the edge of the overpass. From where I was roughly 100 feet off the ground. A fall from there is pretty much 100% fatal. So I'm standing there looking over the overpass, probably at the lowest point of my life up to that point, trying to talk myself into just jumping off. And as I'm standing there, phone in my pocket, my phone rings. You talk about divine intervention. So my phone rings, and it's my buddy from Mississippi just calling to check on me to see how things are going. And when I answer the phone, I'm crying and I'm upset. He just says, "Man, what you doing, dog? What's up?" And I'm crying and I'm upset. I'm like, "Man, I'm standing here on this bridge about to jump off." He just says, "Oh, come on, man, you don't want to do that." And I got back in my car. I talked to him for a little bit, got back in my car and drove away. And I don't know if I ever told him. I probably should. And if he sees this, he knows who it is and he'll know. But I don't think I ever told him that he saved my life that night. But he did. And, really, God saved my life, right? What are the chances that in that moment somebody's going to call? But it happened. I still wasn't done running yet. So this was in 2008. In 2008, even that moment was still not rock bottom. You see, through this whole thing, I thought my problem was drugs. But my problem was never drugs. My problem was pain. Addiction wasn't what was ruining my life. The pain was what was ruining my life. The addiction was just a symptom of it. And until I stopped numbing and running and escaping, nothing was going to change. So you need to understand, if you've been stuck in addiction, whether it's substances, toxic relationships, distractions, or workaholism, it's not because you're weak. It's because your brain is still trying to protect you from something that you don't want to feel. And oftentimes that you are too scared to face. But you don't have to keep escaping. You don't have to keep running. You don't have to stay numb just to survive. The real freedom is facing the thing that you thought was going to break you, and then realizing that it never had the power to begin with. You gave it the power. But here's the thing about healing. It doesn't happen in isolation. You don't just wake up one day and feel whole. You don't just decide to stop running and instantly know how to stand still. But when you spent your whole life pushing people away, what happens when someone refuses to leave? When I met my wife, I was still running, still self-sabotaging, still convinced that love wasn't safe. And this time I had every intention of proving myself right again. But for the first time in my life, my sabotage didn't work. And that shattered everything. Because when the walls that you've built to protect yourself start crumbling, you got two options. Number one, you can build a bigger, better, and stronger wall. Or number two, you can finally step from behind it. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about what happened when I met my wife. The moment that I was forced by her to face myself. Because when you reach the point when you don't have the energy to run anymore, that's when you finally have to decide. Am I going to keep destroying myself, or am I going to fight for my life? Next time, we'll talk about the breaking point and what changed everything. Thank you so much for following along. If you can think of anybody that this would help, go ahead and send it to them. If you haven't already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button so that you can get notified the next time I drop one of these videos in this series. The next episode, we're going to talk about my favorite human in the world, my beautiful, wonderful wife, and the story of how she saved me and changed everything. So, thank you so much. I hope you stick around. As my wife always says, make good choices. Have a great day. I'll see you on the next one.